program is brought to you by Agnes Scott College. For more information about Agnes Scott College, please visit our website at agnesscott.edu.
Good afternoon and welcome to this year's Joseph R. Gladden Jr. Public Lecture. I have never been before on a stage with 24 right next to me. This is kind of exciting. My name is Elizabeth Keach. I'm the president of Agnes Scott College, and I'm really delighted to welcome you here for what I know is going to be an extremely stimulating lecture on a very important and timely topic. The Joseph R. Gladden Jr. Lecture was established by the Agnes Scott Board of Trustees in honor of Joe Gladden, who served with great distinction as chair of the board from 1992 to 2002. And it's given yearly to a member of the Agnes Scott College faculty whose scholarly activities are especially noteworthy. And we're particularly pleased this afternoon to have with us Joe Gladden and his wife Sally, a member of the class of 1965. So please join me in welcoming them back. Joe was a wonderful chair of the board and someone who believed so strongly in the mission of Agnes Scott to engage the intellectual and social challenges of the time and to be a catalyst for conversation about important issues. And so I'm really pleased that this year's lecture is a great example of that. This year's Gladden lecturer is Professor Kathy Scott of the Political Science Department, and her scholarship truly exemplifies that important element of our mission statement that we educate women to engage the intellectual and social challenges of their time. Her scholarship focuses primarily on United States foreign policy since the Vietnam War, and it takes the approach of looking at the intersection of culture, national identity, and the impact of the media. She has a new book forthcoming from the University of North Carolina Press entitled After Vietnam, Reconfigurations of Identity in United States Foreign Policy. She's the author of another book on gender and development and of many articles and book chapters on topics including women in the Angolan Revolution, children, masculinity and the war on terror, the Iranian hostage crisis, and truly every important watershed event of American political identity in the last 30 or 40 years, she has engaged with in her scholarship. She is a tough and beloved teacher and an award-winning scholar. She has received awards from the Fulbright. She's a Fulbright lecturer in South Africa, has received awards from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the American Political Science Association, and the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund. And she'll be talking to us about something that is perhaps the most critical determinant of national identity over the past 5 or 6 years. That is what has happened to American political identity since the watershed moment of 9/11. That moment that led to the launch of what we call the War on Terror, a war that has already lasted longer than World War II, and that engages us with an inchoate enemy, a transnational network such as Al-Qaeda, or indeed, often enough, with the very concept of terrorism or terror itself. It has reshaped many aspects of American domestic and international policy and practice, for good or for ill. And it is a subject deserving of deep scholarly attention. So we're delighted to have a scholar at Agnes Scott who can illuminate these issues for us. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kathy Scott.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, President Keach. I have a number of people I would like to thank before I begin my presentation. First, thank you to Sally and Joe Gladden for the course release this semester. In fact, I was wondering if you would consider giving me another one next semester. You look a little skeptical, so take an hour or so to think about it and get back to me at the reception. I would also like to thank all former and current students who have taken my classes on foreign policy or helped me in some way with research on this and other topics. I don't mean to sound cheesy, but you really are amazing. And thanks to Larry Riddle for being so flexible. Larry is the other Gladden Award recipient who worked with me after my mom suffered a stroke and I was unable to give this talk last February. In fact, Larry has been so flexible that I have decided to ask him to give the Gladden today. So let's all give a big shout out and warm round of applause to Larry Riddle. Okay, yeah, well, he's staying in his seat, okay. Thanks to Tammy Stanko and Calvin Bergamy, who, like many people, seem stunned at my low level of technological savvy. And thank you to Felicia Parker and Demetrius Williams for all of your organizational skills. Finally, I must thank Gus Cochran. I wonder how many times I have stopped Gus in the middle of his own work to ask... Gus, that was a rhetorical question. And did not actually require a response from you at this time. Thank you. Okay. Here goes the talk. I study U.S. foreign policy. Most political scientists would define foreign policy the way the authors of the textbook I'm using this semester define it on page 4 of their book. Quote, the scope of involvement abroad and the collection of goals, strategies, and instruments that are selected by governmental policymakers. I am certainly interested in this definition of foreign policy, and I teach about it this way a lot of the time. But my scholarly interests lie with exploring the intersections between popular culture and foreign policy. 3 general questions are of interest to me. 1, how is foreign policy represented in popular culture? To what extent can we understand popular culture as providing evidence of emergent and competing norms, identities, and beliefs about U.S. power? To what extent do various sites in popular culture become intertwined with the official government story about U.S. foreign policy? In practice, this means that I read magazines such as People and Reader's Digest, alongside foreign affairs and scholarly journals, the National Enquirer and the New York Times. And I watch Black Hawk Down as well as Frontline documentaries. More recently, I've gotten interested in television, particularly shows about the War on Terror. There are many television shows to choose from on this topic, including Alias, The Unit, The West Wing, and even South Park and Family Guy. But the one that has captured my attention most has been 24, a dramatic series on the Fox network that is about to enter its 7th season, and which Time magazine's television critic has labeled, quote, the official cultural product of the War on Terror. But it is more than that. 24 is supposed to be fiction, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that it interacts with the real world of foreign policies in ways that remind us of the increasingly unstable boundaries between entertainment and reality in all realms of life, including the world of foreign policy. 3 concrete examples illustrate this blurring in the case of 24. First, 24's characters torture enemies, suspects, and even their co-workers and family members with great regularity. In November 2006, West Point's dean traveled to Hollywood to complain that cadets often referred to 24's torture tactics in their discussions of the treatment of enemy combatants and POWs, and to plead with the show's producers to tone down the torture. As a result, co-creator Howard Gordon shot an educational video for Human Rights First to remind cadets that what happens on 24 should be regarded as entertainment, not a field guide to torture. A second example, during the 4th season of 24, the Council on American Islamic Relations raised concerns about the show's depiction of the Middle Eastern Araz family, members of a sleeper cell in Los Angeles who plotted the meltdown of a nuclear power plant and the launching of nuclear missiles. The council warned that it could increase stereotyping and bias against Arabs and Muslims. 24 star Kiefer Sutherland, who plays counterterrorism agent Jack Bauer on the show, issued a public service announcement on February 8, 2005, which stated in part, quote, "It is important to recognize that the American Muslim community stands firmly beside their fellow Americans in denouncing and resisting all forms of terrorism." The Council certainly believed that 24's depiction of Arab and Muslim Americans could shape popular perceptions, and that a television show's portrayal of the Middle Eastern terrorist could help justify past government policies of detention, registration, and deportation, as well as legitimize them again in the event of another terrorist attack. And a third and final example. Many architects, as well as supporters of the Bush administration's foreign policy, apparently love the show. John McCain made a cameo appearance in season 5 and told Jon Stewart on The Daily Show that he was a Jack Bauer kind of guy. In June 2006, Rush Limbaugh hosted a panel discussion at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, titled 24, An America's Image in Fighting Terrorism, with Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff providing remarks and Clarence Thomas sitting in the audience. One of the show's creators, Joel Surnow, is a self-described conservative and told Jane Mayer of The New Yorker that in his view, torture works. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia and former Bush administration lawyer John Yoo have both used Jack Bauer's torture of terrorists as a justification for U.S. interrogation policy because he saves hundreds of thousands of lives. Jack does. 24 fans also include Dick Cheney and Karl Rove, all of which seems to confirm that the show is the perfect neoconservative revenge fantasy, with U.S. counterterrorist agents deftly defeating any and all threats facing the U.S. For these fans, Bauer embodies the macho aggression that the neoconservatives believe is necessary to fight and win the war on terror. I hope these 3 examples from the real world make clear that 24 has not only captured the social imagination, but also has become intertwined with the real world, thus prompting the question, where does the world of 24 end and real foreign policy begin? The fact that 24 is broadcast on Fox is also significant. Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, which is Fox Network's parent entity, is dedicating to making a lot of news entertainment, and a lot of both news and entertainment supportive of the global war on terror. The Murdoch style gained a great deal of attention when the News Corporation purchased Dow Jones and Company in the summer of 2007, with Murdoch's penchant for popular journalism derided and predictions abounding about the likely evolution of the Wall Street Journal from serious, public-minded journalism to short puff pieces that would lack investigative heft. I began watching 24 with the expectation that it would indeed normalize and celebrate the resurgence of U.S. expansionism that in earlier eras of, say, mid-19th century Manifest Destiny and 1898 militaristic jingoism. The familiar practices of U.S. nationalism led me to expect 3 major themes on the show. First, I expected to find relentless justifications for the torture of terrorists, just as there were real government officials writing infamous memos calling for torture of suspected terrorists. And we received steady reports from Afghanistan and Iraq about torture at places such as Bagram Air Base and Abu Ghraib. A number of scholars have compared the U.S. use of torture to France's use of it in its colonial war in Algeria, thereby reinforcing depictions of the U.S. as a colonizing and occupation power, intent upon using a whole arsenal of tactics, including torture, but also extraordinary renditions and secret prison camps in the war on terror. Second, I believe that I would find that 24 replicates the racialized hierarchy upon which much of U.S. foreign policy has rested. U.S. foreign policy has been filled with the construction of walls of separation by European settlers threatened by the strangeness of others, including Native Americans, Africans, Latin Americans, Asians, and Middle Easterners and Arabs. After 9/11, thousands of Muslims and people from the Middle East were detained, stories of racial profiling were prominent, and opinion polls showed that Muslims did not feel safe in the U.S. With resurgent U.S. nationalism, I expected 24 to justify fear of a racialized other, and that we would find justifications for racial profiling and a perpetual fear of Middle Eastern terrorism. And third and finally, the character of Jack Bauer fits easily into the long line of masculine heroes who have helped the U.S. realize its manifest destiny at home and abroad. As one New Republic author described Bauer, he is someone who never wavers, second guesses, or gives in to criticism, instead doing whatever needs to be done to safeguard American lives, regardless of the costs. Bauer's many single-handed shootouts with enemies, piloting airplanes and helicopters under treacherous conditions, and regular sacrifices for CTU and country are almost cartoon-like recreations of the classic Western hero. I expected to find an updated Rambo, in other words, this time not refighting and winning the Vietnam War, but fighting and winning the war on terror. So in sum, I expected to find rationalizations of torture, racism, and tough guy masculinity throughout the 6 seasons of 24 that I have now watched. Actually, we have about 4 more episodes, but we're almost done. So, now let me describe the show for you in a nutshell and show a couple of interesting clips about it. Television critics and scholars regularly praise 24 for its clever use of real time, the on-screen appearance of the digital clock, and its split screens. Each season of the show constitutes a day, and each episode an hour, in the life of the fictional counterterrorism unit in Los Angeles. The digital clock is used before and after commercial breaks to convey the passage of real time, and this same digital clock periodically appears on the screen to convey the urgency of events and the impending conclusion of the hour. The split screens bring together the various plot lines of the show. Each show usually has about 4, and it has the effect of reinforcing the sense of simultaneity and pressure on the characters in the face of threats. I should also note that 24 has been a ratings success. Although in its first season it was ranked only 76 in terms of viewers, it has always done well with the coveted 18 to 49-year-old demographic. And in the past 2 seasons, it has ranked in the 20s and garnered around 13 million viewers per week. The star of 24 is Special Agent Jack Bauer, played by the velvety-voiced Kiefer Sutherland. If I had a voice like Sutherland's, students would do the reading and anything else I ask of them, because the completion of this assignment is urgent and we don't have time for slackers. According to the official 24 website, which I can't believe I am admitting to reading quite carefully, Bauer has a BA in English Literature from UCLA, an MA in Criminology and Law from Berkeley, and training in special weapons and tactics with both the LA Police Department and the Army's Delta Force. His positions at CTU have been Director of Field Operations and Special Agent in charge of the LA Domestic Unit. In this clip, you will meet Jack Bauer for the first time and learn about his plight.
Right now, terrorists are plotting to assassinate a presidential candidate. My wife and daughter are in danger, and people that I work with may be involved in both. I'm Federal Agent Jack Bauer, and this is the longest day of my life.
This next clip captures the intensity and fast-paced nature of the show, and also how ridiculously exaggerated it can sometimes be. It is also from season 1. Bauer's wife and daughter have been kidnapped, and he is being framed for an assassination attempt on the President of the United States. Just another regular day at the office. He's been taken into custody by the FBI, but he must escape in order to rescue his wife and daughter. In this scene, Bauer is being chased through a parking lot and gets a cell phone call from his wife, Terry.
Jack, are you all right? Jack?
Yeah, I'm fine. Look, honey, it would really help us out if you could tell us everything you know about where you are.
There must be 50 cop cars in that parking lot, but he invariably escapes and gets away. He always does, or always seems to. Okay, on to my thesis. While I do think that 24 certainly does reflect to some extent some key aspects of the neoconservative resurgence in the War on Terror, I also want to argue that it provides accounts of torture, race, and masculinity that pose important and new questions about the operation of state power and expressions of American nationalism in the 21st century. Instead of looking backward to themes of colonization, imperialism, racism, and manifest destiny, I think that 24 can be fruitfully read as a show that captures newer practices of U.S. hegemony in the global system. So, using torture, race, and masculinity as the three organizing principles for what might be called my critique of the return of imperialism thesis, that is, an argument against those who argue for continuity with previous expansionist eras, I will try to show how we can use 24 to examine important transformations in U.S. foreign policy. Regarding the issue of torture, there has been much interesting commentary and analysis of how 24 justifies and normalizes the use of painful and degrading practices against enemies. Many torture scenes in 24 also have an easier, utilitarian component. Torturing one person will save hundreds of thousands of lives threatened by nuclear plant meltdowns, deadly viruses, and nerve gases, and nuclear missiles. 24 has also quite rightly been criticized for repeatedly converting the rare ticking time bomb scenario into a universal dilemma facing its protagonists. That is, in the face of an extremely grave danger, torture is necessary and it works. But I want to argue that the use of torture on 24 has an additional component, and my argument rests on the observation that friends and enemies are both tortured on the show. Unlike the Bush administration, which has gone to great lengths to justify torture through the creation of a special category of unlawful combatants, written torture memos of justification, created secret prisons, and used extraordinary rendition to send suspected terrorists to countries that use torture, on 24, torture is the go-to method for eliciting information, and it does not have an aura of secrecy to it at all. Torture works to encourage thinking about threats in terms of cost-benefit analysis, efficiency, risk, and most importantly, information. This risk management logic for thinking about torture helps us understand why the Secretary of Defense's son is subjected to sensory deprivation in Season 4, why the U.S. National Security Advisor is tortured in Season 2, and why Jack Bauer himself is tortured quite frequently on the show. In Season 2, his heart is actually stopped as enemies seek to learn the whereabouts of a vital computer chip. In Season 6, Jack Bauer tortures his own brother. Late capitalist economies are relying upon networks, logistics, technology, and just-in-time production to run, and information is the crucial linchpin. Bodies and flesh increasingly become expendable and are sacrificed for the security goals of the state. As the Secretary of Defense tells his son in Season 4, quote, "I love you, but I have a duty to my country." When CTU characters on the show challenge the use of torture, it's largely because of the likely consequences of getting fired or reprimanded, not because of profound ethical dilemmas. And when CTU employees are tortured, they do not return with tales of horror. They either give up crucial information, endure the torture to prove their innocence, or, like Sarah Gaskin in Season 4, demand a pay raise in return for their suffering. Torture produces actionable intelligence. It need not be subject to legal standards, and it gets results, thereby contributing to the continued smooth functioning of the polity. Everyone is valued on the basis of what kind and how much information they possess, and 24 equates moral action on the issue of torture with rational calculation about the cost of not torturing, with cold-blooded utilitarian logic. In this clip from Season 6, Jack Bauer tortures his brother in order to get information from him about wealthy businessman Darren McCarthy, who is suspected of selling suitcase nukes to terrorist Abu Fayed.
You broke it because I told you everything I know.
It's isopentothal. It's a neuroinflammatory designed to induce pain. All
All you have to do to stop me from using it is tell me how to find McCarthy.
Your guess is as good as mine.
2 cc's. Take this to 7 cc's. You will experience a pain I can't even describe.
This scene, as well as other scenes of torture on 24, suggest that we think of CTU as a stand-in for the U.S. state. The state requires compliant subjects who will torture anyone to obtain information vital to population security. Torture is compatible with a mode of governance that portrays threats as everywhere, from foreign sources to co-workers to family members. Anyone could be a potential enemy, and therefore anyone can be tortured. How do racial politics operate on 24? Categories used to mark state boundaries and citizenship in the U.S. have shifted during the past 30 years in ways that 24 partially incorporates into the show. In an era of globalization, multicultural citizenship has been officially embraced, and the gloss of diversity has been promoted as a crucial component of U.S. citizenship. Ironically, one institution where multiculturalism has been most assiduously courted has been the military. In what scholar Melanie McAllister has called militarized multiculturalism, the military, as a key symbol of the nation, became an important representative microcosm that included loyal African Americans, Latinos, and women fighting alongside manly soldiers. In Gulf War I, Colin Powell was the icon of this multicultural militarism, which, while strongly exclusionary toward gays, lesbians, and Arab Americans, still provided glimmers of new techniques for managing racial contradictions in the U.S. In the post-9/11 era, one of the more interesting developments has been commentary about U.S. exceptionalism when it comes to its Muslim population. Observers frequently note that the extensive diversity of the U.S. Muslim community and the more hospitable environment for religious expression help to explain the lack of interest in jihad in the U.S. as compared with Muslims in Europe. Commentators argue that Muslim advocacy is more visible and influential in the U.S. as well. Muslim immigrants, in other words, are portrayed as performing an important role that earlier immigrants have played in the public's imagination. In Bonnie Honig's words, when immigrants come to the U.S., they confirm its choice worthiness, and they often are seen as living proof of the supposed universality of America's liberal democratic principles. As one observer put it, quote, "Muslims never sound quite so American as when asserting their rights against government policies they perceive as unjust." This enlistment of Muslim Arab Americans in the War on Terror can be seen in the following clip from the 4th season of 24, when CTU has learned that 6 domestic nuclear reactors are immune to the kill sequence of the overrides, and the shutdown codes are completely corrupted. I actually have no idea what that means, but the likely consequences are clear. 7 million people are potentially going to die because of a nuclear meltdown. The only way to stop the meltdown is to obtain data at a company called McClellan Foster. Jack Bauer and his partner then lose the data and are chased by some bad guys right into a gun shop owned by 2 men who appear to be Muslim Americans.
These are the 2 men we're looking for. They have a document, a computer printout that's encoded. We need to erase these 2 men and recover the document. Just be aware, one of them is a CTU field agent.
You want us to kill a federal agent?
I'll take care of him personally. He went bad. Started helping the terrorists and dragged the company into it.
LAPD is beginning to respond to this area. So we're going to have to do this quickly if we want to stay off of their radar. Use that to keep in touch.
Sir, we just spotted 2 men headed east on Addison.
Deploy your men in a flanking position a mile down the road and then start moving in. We'll fan out and come in from behind.
You got it. Give me that chopper back on the northwest corner. Let's move!
Come on, this way. This way. Where are we going here? Weapons and ammunition.
Get away!
Paul, get out! Oh!
Get out of here! The next one won't miss!
I'm a federal agent!
Sure you are! Get away from here!
Look, we need your help.
Go, now!
Okay, just relax. I'm leaving. Okay, I'm leaving. Drop the weapon. Now! Kick the gun over to me. Oh, yeah. Get in here. Pick up that gun. My name is Jack Bauer. I am a federal agent.
Well, you should have been here to help us to stop the looting.
You still have any rifles, or they get them too?
Behind the counter here.
Show me.
Look, we're the first to be hit because everyone knows we're Arabs. I mean, we're good citizens. We had nothing to do with what happened today.
Be quiet, Safa. He doesn't care. Look, take what you need, but leave us 2 guns. We chased the looters off once, but they'll be back.
Just stay there.
This scene shows how Muslim Americans are required, when the chips are down, to show their support for the goals of the state in the fight against diabolical threats. Literally standing loyally beside Bauer defines the American nation as simultaneously diverse and loyal to U.S. goals in the war on terror. The message is that minorities must both support state goals and reassure other citizens about their loyalty, and in doing so, they reaffirm that the U.S. deserves it. But an even more significant theme that 24 presents has to do with surveillance, and the promise that surveillance holds as an antidote to racial profiling, selective screening, and human error. In the world of 24, threats come from multiple locations, including domestic hate groups, Serbia, Mexico, Chechnya, and unnamed countries in the Middle East. These multiple threats can also seep into intimate and workplace relationships, with various moles and infiltrators serving as a reminder that no one is ever really secure. These multifarious threats call for ramped-up technologies of surveillance capable of profiling the entire population. Surveillance technologies are omnipresent on 24. They are in homes, the workplace, and in public places such as malls and airports. CTU itself is jam-packed with computers, large television screens, sophisticated telephones, and employees are versed in biometrics, de-encryption, deciphering surveillance tapes, downloading images to PDAs, voice verification technologies, and thermal imaging technologies. The use of the technology is not only thrilling to watch, it seems crucial to fighting the omnipresent nature of the threat facing the U.S. Even CTU has become way too porous. Enemies exist both on the inside as well as the outside. With such non-territorial, networked, and virtual threats, the question is not, who are you, but are you authorized, to quote scholar Benjamin Muller. 24 suggests that the future is one where everyone is in an actual or potential monitored and documented situation, and in so doing it sidesteps the question of whether particular groups might be singled out as riskier or what might be left of citizenship in a world of identity management. It is likely that monitored citizenship under conditions of ubiquitous surveillance will produce differential rights and entitlements, but it is likely to do so under the guises of technological claims of neutrality. In this respect, 24 is an advertisement for the biometrics industry, currently experimenting and implementing various identification technologies such as face and iris recognition, computer chips and passports, smart borders that expedite the movement of some travelers, and so forth. Authorized access rather than racial and ethnic identity frame citizenship politics in 24. This is not to say that the symbol of the Muslim terrorist no longer exists, just that it competes with these new strategies of security. And finally, as much as I would like to agree with many conservative and liberal commentators that Jack Bauer is our 21st century Rambo, I think a closer examination of his mode of operation and the context of his work invite a different interpretation. First of all, Bauer's historical referent is not Rambo's Vietnam War, but the Balkans. The major plot line of season 1 revolves around a military operation called Operation Nightfall, which took place in Belgrade. Bauer and his 5-member Delta Force team were ordered to kill Serbian terrorist Viktor Drazen, but the mission went awry and Drazen's wife and daughter are killed. Drazen was captured, but 5 of Bauer's men were killed. Unlike Rambo, who tried to avenge the U.S. loss in Vietnam, Drazen tries to frame Bauer for the assassination of President David Palmer, as well as kidnap and kill Bauer's wife and daughter. As Bauer puts it, this is personal. While Rambo films illuminated conservative resentment and ideological quarrels with liberals, 24's plot lines are intertwined stories about murky foreign policy and familial and personal dramas. Furthermore, in keeping with the Bauer is no Rambo theme, Bauer does not have it out for inept bureaucrats and lily-livered liberals that the revisionist argued made the military fight Vietnam with one hand tied behind its back. CTU bureaucracy is not composed of smug civilians who stand in the way of Bauer's mission. While Bauer is at times arrested, fired, or taken off a case, it is because he has become a free agent, who is incidentally invariably correct in his reading of the situation and is always eventually welcomed back to CTU. Technology and bureaucracy are not Bauer's enemies as they are in Rambo films, and Bauer does not fault CTU for a failure to recognize the true enemies or its willingness to pursue negotiations when it's force that really works. It is not bureaucracy per se, but individuals with nefarious, often personal motives who threaten Bauer. Representations of Bauer's masculinity depart in other significant ways from the classy, manly imperialism of Manifest Destiny. First, Bauer works with a CTU staff that is diverse, and it seems to be the model organization, both progressive in its hiring policies and inclusive in its assignments and promotions of women and minorities. Bauer himself embraces multiculturalism and the meritocratic achievements of women and minorities. He relies on a female techno-wizard named Chloe O'Brien in seasons 3 through 6, and he has had at least 3 white female bosses, 1 African-American female boss, and 1 African-American male boss at CTU. Race is portrayed as an incidental aspect of culture on the show, and culture is reduced to harmless and benign difference that is no longer a source of workplace discrimination, inequality, and tension. The multicultural workforce feels responsible for the work of CTU, and they seem to see past racial and gender differences to ensure its success. This multicultural CTU simultaneously symbolizes multicultural diversity, in other words, and a common mission to impose a perpetual state of fear. Perhaps most important, in the first 4 seasons, Bauer works closely with an African-American president, President David Palmer. While film has experimented with African-American male presidents, 24 is the first television series that I know of to feature an African-American president for 4 seasons. David Palmer's brother Wayne is the president in season 6. As an important sign of the nation, President Palmer rarely discusses the impact that his race has had on U.S. politics. He offers the desire and possibility of color blindness. In fact, in season 1, he expressed relief that the attempt on his life was the result of a personal vendetta and not because of race. Palmer lectures his son, Keith, in the first season of the show, explaining that part of the importance of getting a second chance is that you take responsibility, and later tells him to trust the system, which is risible given the history of African-American encounters with the law. Palmer goes to the voters to confess his family's culpability in a cover-up, and the voters love him for his integrity. In season 2, he takes a strong stand against hate crimes against Muslim Arab Americans, and he resists the drumbeat for war against 3 unnamed Middle Eastern countries. I am not the first person to notice the similarities between President David Palmer and Barack Obama. Joshua Alston of Newsweek wrote in February 2008 that, quote, Obama shares so much with President Palmer. He went on to write that they are both suave, polite to a fault, and blessed with a gift for rhetoric. The Obama-Palmer similarities constitute another paper and another talk, but it is worth pointing out that the accolades accorded Obama in print and broadcast media themselves constitute a liberal fantasy, one where deep divisions are papered over, voters see the person, not the color, the past disappears, and there is a prospect for redemption. These are phrases taken from Newsweek, The New Yorker, CNN, and The New Republic. And in yet another example of the blurring of the spheres of entertainment and reality, the actor Dennis Haysbert, who played President David Palmer, said in July 2008 that his portrayal of David Palmer may have helped prove the possibility there could be an African American president, a female president, any type of president that puts people first. He is also a major Obama supporter. Furthermore, and finally, the context of Bauer's work differs from Rambo's world. Instead of mass production, regulation, and bureaucratic hierarchy, the world of 24 is post-Fordist, a political economy term that describes the substitution of fluid and collaborative networks for hierarchical command and control production. Flexible specialization, market differentiation, and new communications technologies have refigured the landscape of work. Along with post-Fordist work has come greater worker insecurity and greater difficulties in organizing. CTU exemplifies this workplace. Each worker sits at her workstation with the staff periodically coming together to hear briefings and strategic discussions. Work assignments are parceled out. The demands of rapid response foreclose solidarity, and in fact, workers are wary of trusting each other because of the traitors and double agents that abound. The way time and space are experienced by Bauer and CTU produces anxiety, ambivalence, and frustration. The blurring of boundaries between work and home are woven into 24 storylines, with workers becoming traitors to support their families, families affected by drug addiction and alcoholism, and everyone sacrificing family life for work. Jack Bauer works at the center of this world, displaying what one writer has called networked subjectivity. He is constantly available via cell phones, computers, GPS systems, PDAs, and he often looks exhausted. Unlike many Western heroes, he is a failure at protecting his family. His wife is killed in the first season. Sorry if you haven't seen it yet. And his daughter endures a ridiculous number of kidnappings, chases, and smackdowns at the hands of various villains. When Bauer is revolted at the prospect of yet another torture in season 6 and groans, quote, "I don't think I can do this anymore," we believe him. Bauer is, in short, overwhelmed. Okay, so enough about Jack. I never thought I would say this, but I'm so over Jack Bauer and 24. I will conclude this talk by placing 24 in the larger context of my research interest. The claims made by continuity arguments revolve around the centrality of the self-contained U.S. state, defined by territory, frontiers, and their accompanying rhetoric of nationalism. In other words, the war on terror should be considered as something comparable to earlier eras of expansionist imperialism. The categories of analysis used in the continuity argument revolve around tough guy masculinity, juxtapositions of civilization and savagery, releasing peoples from the captivity of dictators and backward regimes, and a theology of chosenness that serves as a driving force of U.S. exceptionalism. After 9/11, observers frequently pointed out, attitudes of manifest destiny had returned with a vengeance. What many scholars and commentators assume is exactly what my research seeks to call into question. If we accept the continuity argument, we risk losing sight of organizational, economic, and ideological forces at work in U.S. foreign policy that make it compatible with new styles of governance. Displays of tough guy masculinity compete with corporate-style campaigns to explain war strategy as well as the tactics used to fight wars. Here I'm referring to the various taglines attached to the war in Iraq, such as Operation Forward Together and Plan for Victory, and the corporate-style benchmarks for assessing progress, along with the surge to create the appearance of growing stability. In terms of fighting the war, outsourcing to private companies such as Blackwater and the use of private companies in guarding U.S. and Iraqi politicians, torturing at Abu Ghraib, and killing civilians alert us not only to war crimes, but to the fraying connections between state, nation, and soldiering. The outpouring of patriotism after 9/11 seemed to confirm the resilience of manifest destiny. Flag-waving, jingoism, and proclamations of innocence and special destiny were in abundance. On the other hand, the president urged people to go shopping to demonstrate their patriotism. Some former wars required collective and sustained mobilization, but the injunction to go shopping alerts us to the consumerist reconfiguration of the public sphere that authors Crinson and Ginsberg have persuasively depicted: partial and selective activation, treating citizens as customers, and elite efforts to depress political participation. Historically, consumers have been mobilized for a number of projects, from victory gardens in World War II to demands for equal treatment in restaurants by African Americans to grassroots efforts to campaign for safe products. Today, citizens are encouraged to march to malls armed with credit cards to celebrate endless consumption, and images of consumers mobbing malls and big box stores for post-Thanksgiving Day bargains abound. For the most part, consumption has been decoupled from solidarity and is figured as an individual effort to reach the mirage of fulfillment through purchases. Defining the enemy in racially charged terms also was ubiquitous after 9/11. Afghanistan was described as a neo-feudal, backward, and barbaric country, and Iraq was once again described as a country caught in the clutches of a Hitler-like dictator. In other respects, however, government leaders and analysts reach for a corporate vocabulary to describe bin Laden and al-Qaeda, characterizing it as a holding company, a Starbucks or McDonald's franchise, an E.F. Hutton for terrorists, Terror Inc., and Osama and Company. Even the 9/11 Commission described the terrorist hijackers as entrepreneurs led by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a, quote, entrepreneur seeking venture capital and people. This is an image of the enemy that resembles a flattened, decentralized global business enterprise, a virtual foe adept at communications technologies and requiring a nimble response, state and private alliances and data gathering, and new modes of war fighting. I want to make the case for a different sort of continuity at work in the war on terror by situating 9/11 in a broader context of a global order that emerged during the 1970s and early 1980s and has the now familiar designation of globalization and the perhaps less familiar name of neoliberalism. The literature on this topic is unbelievably vast, but what I will stress here is its emphasis upon the construction of a single global economic order as its territorial frame of reference and the concomitant emergence of new regimes of power that decenter the state. Terrorism is the militarized enemy of globalization's project of one world, and like global capital, there is no inside-outside distinction when it comes to terrorism. The state plays a role in fighting this war on terror, to be sure, but it does so alongside transnational corporations, NGOs, militias, and private security companies. The war on terror has accelerated the demise of older paradigms centered on the nation state and their accompanying focus on masculine bravery, captivity, race war, and national unity. The world of foreign policy is increasingly being defined by threat, risk, expendable bodies, and networked and consumerist subjectivity, all of which exceed the state-centric readings of U.S. foreign policy. It is in this sense that 24 does outpace reality because it prefigures our future. In conclusion, my name is Kathy Scott, and while no one in my family has been kidnapped, and I have not been accused of trying to assassinate the President of the United States, and none of the people I work with, as far as I know, are behind any plots, this has still been the longest day of my life.